No ana ke a kua I kana hele hele I alai ia e ke ki ohu e kaua koko. O na kino malu I kalani malu e hoe. E ho ulu mai ana o laka I kona mau kahu. O mako no, mako no, o mako no. Hea mai nā pua ka ilima, ilihia I ka makani o ka hau pepe. E komo I ka mamalu o ke kumula au. E komo I ka olu o ka hali I maile. E komo I ka ahu ilima o ke ali'i. E komo I ka hale I malama lama ai ka leo. Ola ka ilima I ke aloha. He mai no e. Nani vale ka piko ka mauna, ke po'o ke la o mauna kea, ki pupa ia, e ka ohu I ke ia, I ka I o moku ola, e ola o ka lani ku I ka moku, nana I ka apuni ka honua e. Nani vale ka piko ka mauna, ke po'o ke la o mauna kea, ki pupa ia, e ka ohu I ke ia, I ka I o moku ola, e ola o ka lani ku I ka moku, nana I ka apuni ka honua e. Aloha a Hawai'i o ke ave, me ho'oi po I ka malanai. E noho ana I ka lihi lihi I ke ia o nā vai vela vela. E ola o ka lani ku I ka moku, nana I ka opu I ka honua e. Aloha a Hawai'i o ke ave, me ho'oi po I ka malanai. E noho ana I ka lihi lihi I ke ia o nā vai vela vela. E ola o ka lani ku I ka moku, o lili u o lolo ku I ke kapue. Hei noa no lili o kalani. He mele ke ia for Kamehameha e ha, the King Kamehameha the fourth, talks about this ahupua, ua nani o nu'uanu. Ua nani o nu'uanu, I ka lau o ke kawelu. Ua nani o nu'uanu, I ka lau o ke kawelu. Ua hala vai akula, me ka makani nui. Ua hala vai akula, me ka makani nui. E ini ana ka mana'o, e ike a ka huwailana. He ini ana ka mana'o, e ike a ka huwailana. O ko uho ano ia, o ka ua ki o wau. O ko uho ano ia, o ka ua ki o wau. Ua pono no ka ua, ho'o kohu ana ia ka mana'o. ua pono no ka hua, ho'o kohua na ia ka mana'o. Ha'ina mai ka inoa, o ka lani I o lani. Ha'ina mai ka inoa, o ka lani I o lani. Mahalo. We'll take you to the island of Kauai and use the uli uli and tell you a story about the island of Kauai. Ula no veo. The bright red sun shines down on the ilima blossoms. Ula no veo. Ki'ipa. Ula no veo la la e kala e lai kapua ilima la e. Ula no veo la la e kala e lai kapua ilima la e. Ua I ke vale o e lai ka ua loku lai a ʻohana leila e. Ua I ke vale o e la I ka ua loku lai a ʻohana leila e. A ka lai a ono hili lai ka huwa I lana lai o ka awa puhi lai. A ka lai a ono hili lai ka huwa I lana lai o ka awa puhi lai. Lipo lipo vale o e lai a o kana hele lai a o ohi e lai. Lipo lipo vale o e lai a o kana hele lai a o ohi e lai. Ha'ina mai ka puana lai no ka moha I lai no hei no ala e. Ha'ina mai ka puana lai no ka moha I lai no hei no ala e. O nā pua o ka ili mala e a mele mele ili a lani I ke kulala. Hele a hele ina ni o e la e a puka mai e nā pua. Ili mala e a puka mai me ke aloha la e. Aloha.
Aloha and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ed Young, and I will be your MC for today. I am with the Office of Public Affairs for the Baha'i community of Hawaii. Today's program is being broadcast live on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube to an international audience. So they're with you today. Today is the second anniversary of the Lahaina Maui fires. May we please take a moment of silence right now in remembrance of them. Mahalo. I extend our deepest appreciation to Kumuviki Takamine Holt for opening this session with the sacred Oli and her halau, Pua Alimi Ali'i Alima, for their beautiful hula. In Hawaii, it is traditional that all auspicious events begin with a sacred chant. Kumuviki invoked an Oli Pale, which is a sacred blessing that clears the space of any negative energy, sanctifies it, and joins us together in harmony. Thank you, Kumuviki, and your incredible dancers of Halau Pua Oli'i Ilima. We acknowledge all of the faith communities, civil society organizations, and state and city governments that have come together to support this 80th commemorative anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We thank Senator Stanley Chang for sponsoring today's program and arranging for our use of the Senate Chamber Auditorium. At this time, we would like to share a special message from Hawaii State Governor Josh Green, who couldn't join us today in person, but has kindly sent us his greetings and his reflections on this 80th anniversary. Please pay Governor Green's message.
Aloha. It's an honor to join you virtually for the 80th commemorative anniversary, remembering Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Today, we gather to honor those who perished, support survivors and their families, and reaffirm our shared commitment to a world free from the threat of nuclear weapons. Hawaii, at the center of the Pacific, has always served as a bridge between East and West. Our deep ties with Japan, rooted in shared values of respect, resilience, and aloha, remind us that peace is more than the absence of war. It's built through understanding and compassion among nations. The lessons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain painfully clear. Nuclear weapons bring devastation beyond measure, and the rising global tensions we face today only strengthen the urgency for diplomacy, dialogue, and disarmament. Hawaii knows the importance of this work. Our own experiences have shown us how fragile life can be and how vital it is that we move forward together in the pursuit of peace. On behalf of the state of Hawaii, I extend my deepest aloha to everyone gathered here and to the organizers of this important program. May we honor those we remember today by ensuring no community ever endures such a tragedy again. Mahalo and aloha.
Thank you, Governor Green, for your message. Please note that the bios of all our speakers have been shown to our international audience via a chat box. Our auditorium audience have printed programs with each speaker's bio. None of the speaker's bio will therefore be read aloud during this program. I would like to invite our moderator for today's portion of the program, Audrey Kitagawa. She will read a letter from U.S. Senator Mazie Hirono and introduce the film, The Bomb, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, which is an integral part of today's program. Mahalo.
Thank you so much, everyone. Please be seated. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ed, and aloha mai kāko'o. I'd like to read a letter from U.S. Senator Mazie Hirono, who sits on the important Senate Committee on Armed Services. She sent the following letter, which I would like to read to you, and it begins, in recognition of the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Aloha and welcome to this panel discussion commemorating the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I regret that I am not able to join all of you in this important occasion, but I appreciate you coming together in this somber anniversary. In 1945, 2 bombs were detonated over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, becoming the first instance of atomic weaponry in warfare. Thousands of lives were lost in an instant, with many more casualties resulting from radiation exposure to follow in years to come. Nearly 8 decades later, the tragedy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki serves as a stark reminder of the destructive capabilities of such weaponry and a grim warning of the dangers of nuclear weapons. Amidst rising global tensions, the threat of nuclear weaponry is fraught to the forefront of all of our minds. Working towards a nuclear-free future will require a careful, thorough, and sensible diplomatic approach that starts with meaningful cooperation with our allies. As a member of the Senate Committee on Armed Forces, I will continue to work with my colleagues to advocate for the reinforcement of diplomatic resolutions and strong congressional oversight of nuclear policy. Mahalo to the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation, the Hawai'i chapter of the United Nations Association, Global Security Institute, Voices for a Nuclear Weapons-Free World, the Interfaith ʻOhana of Hawai'i, Unity Earth, the SINE Network, Jodo Mission of Hawai'i, Soka Gakkai International, the Renkon Project, and the Light of Awareness International Spiritual Family for working together to co-sponsor this event. To the moderator, Ed Young, and the panelists, Rorry Daniels, Jonathan Granoff, and Audrey Kitagawa, I commend your commitment preserving the lessons of our past to inform a safer, peaceful future for all. My best wishes for a productive and informative event. Sincerely, Mazie K. Hirono, United States Senator. Thank you so much, Senator Hirono, for your letter to all of us today. Today's program will delve into international diplomacy, policies, and the key principles of diplomacy that can bring about effective ways of forging rapprochement when countries are in the throes of seemingly intractable positions. We begin this portion of our program with a presentation of an edited film which was created 5 years ago for the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Several of the filmmakers of this film are manning our technology and cameras today. The messages in this film are as important and highly relevant today with increasing geopolitical tensions and conflicts, and the threats to use nuclear weapons made several times over as these current conflicts have deepened and become prolonged. We heard just about a week ago about President Trump's move to a classified but appropriate location, 2 United States nuclear submarines over threats by former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev reminded the United States that Moscow still has nuclear strike capabilities. Trump said in a social media post that he sent the submarines just in case. These foolish and inflammatory statements are more than that. There is no question that tension is rising over nuclear weapon threats, so this film must be played to help us to remember the importance and the ways back to de-escalation of threatening, aggressive, and preemptive actions that do not lead us to the pathways of peace. The film features the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, former U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz, and Mikhail Gorbachev, former president of the Soviet Union, both of whom passed away not long after this film was made. This is an important historic film, and a professor friend of mine who teaches international diplomacy at his college makes seeing this film mandatory for his students. You will see that at this time the film was made, Secretary of State George Shultz was 100 years old, but he was as sharp as ever. We can appreciate the dedication of the political leaders to work toward making the world a safer place. In this film, they reflect on the 1986 Reykjavik Summit, a significant meeting that shifted the dynamics of the Cold War and paved the way for further disarmament discussions that led to the reduction of the nuclear arsenal of the Soviet Union and the United States. At that time, these two countries had the largest nuclear stockpiles in the world. This film shows the importance of diplomacy and the qualities of leadership that make significant changes for the betterment of the security of people and the world. Let's play this film. Thank you.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima.
A warm hello from Hiroshima. My name is Mazie Kazumi, and I am the mayor of Hiroshima, and also the president of Mayors for Peace. This video, to mark 75 years since atomic bombings, has been created by 4 prominent international interfaith and intercultural organizations, making a joint appeal for nuclear abolition for the first time. It is my great honor to have this opportunity to offer a few words as a part of such a meaningful production. On August 6, 1945, the world saw the first atomic bombing in history. And the Hibakusha, those who barely survived, have been appealing for peace with a conviction no one else should ever suffer as we have. However, despite the fervent will of the Hibakusha, self-centered nationalism on the rise and governments are expanding and strengthening their nuclear arsenals. What's more, the world is now confronted with the great challenge of COVID-19. With many countries, people are united in a spirit of humanitarianism against the virus. However, between countries, tensions are still high. Nuclear weapons, like an infectious disease, are a common threat to humanity. Civil society must unite to fight against this threat. In turn, policymakers around the world must respond to such public opinion by taking action. Mayors for Peace, composed of more than 7,900 member cities in 164 countries and regions around the world, stand with policymakers who courageously seek to eliminate nuclear weapons and absolute evil for humanity. I sincerely hope that everyone watching this video will join our fight for lasting world peace.
皆さんこんにちは。平和市長会議副会長を務めている長崎市長の田上富久です。1945年8月9日に原爆による壊滅的被害を経験した長崎市の市民を代表して平和と連帯のメッセージをお送りします。このビデオは被爆75周年という節目の年に一人一人がそれぞれの立場で核兵器廃絶に向けた行動を起こすことを呼びかけることを目的に制作されたと伺っています。このような意義ある取り組みに参加できることを光栄に思います。私たちは今、新型コロナウイルス感染症の世界的流行によって安全と安心を失う経験をしています。核兵器もまた地球全体から安全と安心を長時間にわたり奪う存在です。しかし、残念ながら身近に感じることができません。このままでは、その脅威の大きさに本当に気づくのは、どこかで再び使われた後になるのではないか、と、被爆者をはじめ被爆地は懸念しています。しかし、それでは手遅れなのです。No to nuclear weapons。核兵器はいらないと一緒に声を上げてください。長崎は被爆者の平和への思いを次の世代に引き継ぎ、市民社会に平和な文化を育むための取り組みと、平和市長会議のネットワークなどを通じて、世界に仲間を増やしていく活動を続けていきます。このビデオをご覧の皆さんが、私たちの仲間となり、一緒に行動してくれることを心からお待ちしています。
正義の味方になれる助けてあげたいな、そういう気持ち子供も持ってましたね。ですからそういう気持ちが強かったから自分の母親になるだろうとね、言葉の表現できないでね、記憶に残ってるのは偉い人になってください。それはですね、多分もう書書くしたことなんですね。それ辛いし。
3.5 decades ago, the world was moving very rapidly toward a Cold War, turning into a fire of destruction. In the United States and the Soviet Union, very public demonization had overcome reasoned political discourse, and the readiness to use nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction precariously hung over all of our heads. From the over 65,000 nuclear warheads then to the less than 14,000 today, progress has certainly been made. But the risks remain utterly unacceptable, and much needs to be done. This vision for a safer, nuclear weapons-free world remains to be fulfilled. That is our task today. It is thus an enormous honor to hear today from President Mikhail Gorbachev and Secretary of State George Shultz, two men who not only made history, it's really fair to say they helped save history. And for that, and I know I express this for millions of people, thank you so very much.
Mikhail, you were dynamite when you were in office. You had imagination, you had strength, you had vision, and you changed things. And with your option under President Reagan, you changed the world. I'm in my 100th year, but I feel like a promising young man. Let me tell you a story about how things get started and the vital importance of leadership in making that happen. When we came into office in the Reagan period, relations with the Soviets were as cold as they could be. After they invaded Afghanistan, President Jimmy Carter cut off all relations with them. When I came into the job of Secretary of State, I worried about this because as Secretary of Treasury, I had dealt with the Soviets and made deals with them that worked and got to know the personalities and had some fun and one or two rather dramatic circumstances. So I was uneasy. I talked to President Reagan, who was surrounded by people who wanted to keep things down. And he gave me permission to have weekly meetings with Ambassador Dobrynin if the purpose, we would stick to the purpose of getting little weeds out of the place before they grew. We had enough problems, so Dobrynin was glad to take part. So one day, I'm returning from a trip to China, and I landed at Air Force Base. It was snowing. I was lucky to land. And our phone rings. It's Nancy. She says, why don't you and your wife come over and have supper with us at the White House? So then they started asking me about Soviet leaders, because they knew I'd dealt with them in the past. And so I brought Dobrynin over, and we talked about seeing it drove up, and Rena was reassuring. Then we talked about Soviet Jewry. It wasn't just generalizations. He had names, places, incidents. Then we talked about the Pentecostals who had rushed in their embassy during the Carter administration. They were still there because if you expel them, they get killed. And what can it do? Reagan kept saying, it's like a big neon sign in Moscow saying, we don't treat people right. We don't let them worship the way they want. We don't let them immigrate. We ought to do something about it. I won't say a word. I just want something to happen. So we're riding back, and I said to Dobrynin, let's take on the Pentecostal project, see if we can do something about it. So we did. And after a while, I finally got a piece of paper back from the Soviets that I thought was promising, although I could see it had its problems. And I took it over to the president. I said, Mr. President, please don't call your lawyer. He'll point out the holes in this memo. But I have to believe that after all that's preceded this, and this is a pretty good memo, if we get them out of the embassy, they'll be allowed to go home and eventually immigrate. So we decided to do it. And we got them out, and sure enough, they were allowed to go home. And after a period, not only were they allowed to emigrate, but all their families were allowed. It was huge, 50 or 60 people. It was gigantic. Nothing like that had ever happened before. Of course, the press was after us. How did that happen? And Reagan would say nothing. And I always felt that two little things were done as a result of that. On the one hand, Reagan could say, I trust the Soviets to deliver what they say they'll deliver. And they more than did that. And they have to say, he said he wouldn't say anything, and he didn't. And then we all knew the temptation of an American politician to take credit for anything. So there's just a little element of trust there. Trust is the coin of the realm. So that built. And I think it was part of the evolution of the relationship between two personal giants, Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. And they could interact comfortably with each other because they trusted each other. They knew that the other one would do whatever they said they would do. So that was a big thing.
Но особенно я хотел сказать, вложив все эмоциональное, что в моей душе существует, что хуже всего в том, что в последние годы произошел коллапс доверия в отношениях между ведущими державами, которые, согласно Уставу ООН, несут главную ответственность за поддержание международного права, за безопасность, который по-прежнему обладает огромными запасами ядерного оружия и обязаны его сокращать, вплоть до его ликвидации. Это обязательство договора о нераспространении никто не отменял. Я с огромной тревогой вынужден говорить о милитаризации международных отношений. Это результат вот всех этих ошибок, которые допущены, промахов, крупных, опасных. Проблемы, конфликты последних 2 десятилетий, которые вполне можно было бы урегулировать мирными политическими, дипломатическими средствами, пытались решить путем применения силы. Так было и в бывшей Югославии, и в Ираке, и в Ливии, и в Сирии. Хочу подчеркнуть, что это не привело к решению проблем. Результатом стало расшатывание международного права, подрыв доверия, милитаризации как политики, так и мышления. И в этих условиях говорить о движении к безъядерному миру становится все труднее. Это надо честно признать. Пока мировая политика не вернется в нормальную колею, пока не произойдет демилитаризация международных отношений, цель, совместно обозначенная в Рейкьявике, будет не приближаться, а отдаляться. Чтобы изменить такое положение, необходим диалог. Фактически отказ от него в последние годы был самой большой ошибкой. Давно уже пора возобновить его по всей повестке дня, не ограничиваясь обсуждением региональных проблем, по которым существует разногласие. В годы, когда мы покончили с холодной войной, мы признали, что помимо национальных и иных интересов есть общие интересы, прежде всего предотвращение ядерной войны.
So there was supposed to be a meeting in Washington, and the Soviets sent word saying they'd like to have a preliminary meeting before the Washington meeting. We said Reykjavik would be okay because it's isolated. Hofty House had a downstairs, and there was a little room on the side. That's where we met. The room was very small. Reagan's at one end, Gorbachev's at the other end. I'm sitting beside Reagan. Shevardnadze beside Gorbachev. That's all the interpreters. So it's very intimate. discussion. We went there for 2 days, and we had real exchanges. And on the first day, morning, Gorbachev laid on the table all of our negotiating points. He was agreeing to them, all of them. We were astonished. We went back and talked it over our group. And then all of a sudden, he put a condition on everything, that we have to kill a strategic defense initiative. And Reagan had proposed this, and his idea was that people will find ballistic missiles, and somehow you have to defend yourself against them. And he wasn't about to give it up. So we had, on the one hand, huge amount of progress, including a world free of nuclear weapons. In the end, we couldn't agree on anything. We did agree in a separate negotiation that human rights would be a regular, recognized item on our agenda. That was a breakthrough, a very important marker. Then we had the Washington Summit, which the INF Treaty was signed. That was first big breakthrough of reducing, eliminated an entire class of nuclear weapons. And these were relatively short-range ones, which were very dangerous because the amount of time between when they're fired and when they hit is like nothing. And so the chance to defend yourself is minimal. That took place at Reykjavik.
После того, что было сказано, что ядерная война недопустима, что в ней не может быть победителей, и что она нельзя остаться в такой ситуации, что надо заняться всей этой нагромождением этих и избавляться от ядерного оружия. Думаю, что Рейкьявик – это действительно то, что останется в истории навсегда. Ибо не будь Рейкьявика того, что хоть и с трудом, но что последовало после него, как начала меняться ситуация и отношения, мы могли прийти такой, когда и ядерное оружие могло при его масштабах и вырваться из-под контроля политического. Поэтому надо было сделать. И мы пошли. Переговоры были интенсивными, очень основательными, прямыми. Были президенты, были министры иностранных дел с ними. И была большая группа инспекторов политических и военных, экспертов. Удивительно, что все как бы чувствовали, что здесь что-то произойти должно серьезное, что изменить всю ситуацию в мире, все. Обычно неугомонные представители прессы ждали. Точно так же, как и все мы, видели, что получается. Мы начали выходить и на договоренности, означающие какие-то детали. То есть все можно, решается. И вот когда вдруг появилась тема о стратегической оборонной инициативе, я и сейчас даже не могу сказать, что я полностью убежден, что вот это как бы продуманная, выношенная идея. Получается, что вроде бы американцы не очень-то хотели, боялись. Ведь не зря же, не случайно Тэтчер сказала, еще один Рейкьявик мы не выдержим. Не очень они хотели, хотя по разговорам Рейган иногда даже первым говорил, мы должны идти к безъядерному миру. Поэтому это было самое большое потрясение. И вот драматическое продолжение этой ситуации выглядело так, что мы, договорившись практически обо всем, мы могли получить уже в Рейкьявике готовый документ. И все оборвалось. Это было, конечно, вообще... Нас заставило это очень серьезно думать о наших партнерах. С какими мыслями, с какими планами, с какими какие у них расчеты. И особенно для меня было важно то, что Шульц, улетая с Рейкьявика, в беседе с журналистами сказал, что, к сожалению, не состоялось. Высказал разочарование в связи с тем, что прорыв не состоялся. Я за этот тезис надо было развенчать. Потому что мы так много сделали, действительно заглянули за горизонт, что там уже в безъядерном мире. Отдать такое на съедение, на уничтожение реакционным силам, прямо скажем. Это было бы недопустимо и непростительно. Я сказал, все рассказал как есть. И сказал, что это прорыв. На утро Шульцу доложили, что я сказал, и он собрал тут же пресс-конференцию и присоединился к Соединенных Штатах. Это, конечно, надо воздать должное Шульцу. Он вообще играл весьма конструктивную и позитивную роль.
As the Reykjavik meeting was winding down, Mikhail Gorbachev took me aside and said, "George, you've seen the Promised Land and didn't get there." I said, "Mikhail, so have you, and you didn't get there. And the reason is you had a roadblock on our learning how to prevent ourselves by being hit from a ballistic missile. So if we prohibit them, let's get rid of all this stuff." And we parted. Since then, things have gone downhill. People think of all kinds of reasons not to do the work. But there is something hopeful beyond simply a belief that a worthwhile goal is to get to the Promised Land. I'm really excited to know that the National Academy of Sciences here has, with some very prominent physicists, once again in touch with their counterparts in Russia. And they're meeting fairly frequently, lining out possible positions and problems, and also getting to know each other. This is a very good development. And it is supported by the fact that the Vatican and the Russian Orthodox Church are trying to do something of similar nature. So, with all of the gloom and doom people are spreading, forget it. Something good is happening. And in the end, the good things will prevail.
Dear friends, my nuclear journey began 75 years ago. In the summer of 1945, I was a U.S. Marine captain on a troop ship in the Pacific bound for San Diego. Early in the voyage, we heard that something called an atomic bomb had been dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. By the time we reached port in San Diego, a second bomb had been used at Nagasaki. We wouldn't be headed to the Japanese mainland after all. Ronald Reagan believed that nuclear weapons were immoral. My friend, Bishop Swing, has rightly observed that while the U.S. President may put his hand on the Bible at his inauguration, it is when he puts his hand on the nuclear trigger that he assumes a godlike power. But we are men, not gods. Together with President Gorbachev, we had seen the promised land, but we had not been able to get there during our negotiations. Today, I am alarmed. We live in an unsafe world that grows more dangerous with the proliferation of nuclear weapons. We need to make sure that the global population understands the gravity of the nuclear threat, and we do everything we can to reduce the risks of that threat. But I am also optimistic. I see that wise and knowledgeable people are talking about these crucial issues. Such dialogue can lead to progress, so there is hope. I have seen the Promised Land, so I know that it exists, and the leaders who can take us there can emerge from among our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Sincerely yours, George P. Schultz.
Дорогие друзья, я был очень рад узнать от моего друга Джорджа Шульца, что в связи с 75-й годовщиной атомной бомбардировки Хиросимы ваша организация планирует выступить с совместным заявлением о необходимости ликвидации ядерного оружия. It is a passionate appeal to join the fight for a nuclear weapon-free future for all mankind. Fighting for the abolition of nuclear weapons is the civic duty of each and every one of us. Together with you, I am appealing to the citizens of all countries. Put pressure on your leaders, politicians, and elected officials. Keep telling them again and again that the very existence of nuclear weapons poses a deadly threat to humanity. Demand that they take concrete action so that the arsenals of nuclear weapons get smaller with every passing year. We started on the road to a world without nuclear weapons in Reykjavik. It turned out to be a difficult and thorny path. But there must be no other goal than the complete elimination, the abolition of nuclear weapons. I wish you the strength of spirit, dedication, and perseverance in advancing that goal. С уважением, Михаил Горбачев.
Stay put, Brent, until I can get on. So thank you so much, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Okay, thank you. So this is now a historic film, and the points raised in it contain real pearls of wisdom for all of us. And let's get right to our takeaways from this film and what lessons it poses for us today. The mayor of Nagasaki, conveys the message of mobilizing citizens to work together to say no to nuclear weapons. Rorry, what role do you see civil society, ordinary citizens can play in creating a tipping point for transformation so that nuclear weapons can be abolished? And what is our role as ordinary citizens? You have the floor.
Well, thank you. First of all, let me just say thank you so much to the organizers of this important and somber event, and also to all the audience joining us online and in person. Even though it's a very difficult topic to think about, the 80th anniversary of the terrible tragedy that was the dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan, it's really important that we come together at these moments and reflect on where we've come, how far we've come, and what there is left to do. So I think as ordinary citizens and as members of a vibrant civil society, there are several things we can do. It's important, I think, in this moment to remember that the proliferation of nuclear weapons is really based on fear. It's based on fear of attack of another country. It's based on fear of others that seem to have agendas that we don't understand or seem to be our enemies. And so there are a couple of different ways that I think civil society and ordinary people can address that level of fear. The first is that in terms of state-to-state relations, international relations, we have to be able to hold our leaders to account. We have to ask them very difficult and direct questions. So for example, the United States has approximately 5,000 nuclear weapons. Russia has about the same. The Chinese are building. Right now they have about 600 nuclear weapons. They're planning to double or triple that number over the next 10 years. It's really incumbent, especially in a country like the United States, where we have direct access to our politicians, to ask them, how many nuclear weapons are enough? How many nuclear weapons do we need in order to protect and defend ourselves? 5,000 nuclear weapons would blow the world up magnitudes many times over. And so when leaders develop strategies involving thousands of nuclear weapons, we have to really reality test those strategies and say, how many weapons are enough? If the answer is, less than 100, which is probably accurate, that even if we were hit by a nuclear weapon, we would be able to defend ourselves through not thousands of nuclear weapons, because again, we would be blowing the earth to smithereens, then what is the problem with negotiating arms control agreements? So you can start working on fear by reality testing things, including through regular and direct conversations with our politicians. I think the second thing that we can all do is to remember that we have a great power to connect to societies that are not like ours. We can build bridges of cultural understanding through civil society networks in other countries. I've seen personally, I've been involved in negotiations with the North Koreans, for example, a society that is so unlike ours in almost every aspect. And yet, the people there want the same things that people in this room and people across our country want. They want a better life for themselves and their children. They want security and freedom from threat. And they want international status and to be seen as a country and a culture worthy of appreciating and respecting. We may not agree with the way that they have chosen to get there. We may not agree with their government policy, but certainly we can help and start building processes of understanding so we don't see them as enemies that could be potentially subject to the type of nuclear threat that we saw in Japan. And then we can work amongst ourselves. Fear is not simply about country to country or people to people. It's also about what we do in our own societies. And so to the extent that we need to elect leaders that are courageous, that have leadership and vision, like the ones in the video that we just watched, that can imagine a world free of nuclear weapons and actively work to bring that world into the promised land to light. We need to be able to elect those politicians by building trust within our own societies that it's okay to be courageous and stand up to these type of fears. So I encourage everyone in this room, watching online, people all over this country in particular, at this moment where we seem so divided, to actively reach out to people who don't have the same political beliefs as you, to actively reach out to people who seem captured by the type of fear that we're seeing. And it's very easy to be captured by fear right now. We're in an information overload. I mean, we absolutely do not have the capacity to process the amount of information that we hold even in our own hands and our own cell phones. So reach out to people who you know build human connections. And in doing so, we can really develop the type of shared values that will be incredibly important to electing leaders that are courageous enough to stand up to threat without threatening others.
Thank you so much, Rorry. So Jonathan, in the film, you indicate that during the Cold War, there were 65,000 nuclear warheads and to a reduction of less than 14,000 nuclear warheads today. So it sounds as if progress has been made. Jonathan, can you explain to us how this happened?
Absolutely. It happened because of what Mikhail Gorbachev said, trust is the currency of the realm, and trust has to be built. That process actually really begins with another Republican president, not President Reagan, but actually with Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon called for the abolition of biological weapons and retired the United States arsenal of biological weapons unilaterally, challenging the rest of the world to join and bringing about the Biological Weapons Convention, banning that weapon of mass destruction. Richard Nixon also was the president when the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was brought into effect in 1970. That treaty has three pillars. One pillar is every country in the world, except for 4 countries in the world, are parties to that treaty. Israel, Pakistan, India, and North Korea are not parties to the treaty. Every other country is. And only 5 countries out of all the rest of the countries in the world are allowed to have nuclear weapons under that treaty. The United States, China, France, the United Kingdom, and Russia. But the treaty contains within it a bargain. It is that those 5 countries agreed that they would negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons, disarmament. That commitment was made in the Nixon administration. And the rest of the world was promised the right to develop nuclear energy. Whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, that's not the question. The treaty gives countries the right to do that. Also, during the Nixon administration, the anti-ballistic missile treaty came into being. That basically assured that the countries with the weapons would be vulnerable, that they wouldn't try to prevent themselves from being hit with nuclear weapons. Thus, it was called mutually assured destruction. So that process set in motion many, many civil society endeavors that were supported in a bipartisan process in the United States. I was very involved with a lawyers group, Lawyers Alliance for World Security, and we hosted lawyers from the then Soviet Union. We brought them to bankruptcy court, astonished them that the state would protect a debtor from the rapaciousness of our banks. We took them to see jury trials where they saw citizens engaged in the administration of justice. But what struck them the most was we took them to see judges that were holding the state to the rule of law. There was one judge, Norma Shapiro in Philadelphia, who was holding the city of Philadelphia in contempt of court for overcrowding in prisons. These lawyers from the Soviet Union said, "How can you do this? How do you hold the state to the rule of law?" She said, "Well, I'm the judge. It's cruel and unusual to overcrowd prisons, and I'm going to stop it."
Those lawyers became the advocates of glasnost and perestroika. They were they were instrumental in helping change take place. There was another group, the Pugwash had conferences, was a group of scientists. They won the Nobel Prize for bringing groups of scientists together. So a fabric of trust was created. And thus there was a culture in our country that believed that we could make change. So when Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan decided that they would meet in 1985, there was a culture of people in this very conservative Republican administration. And we saw George Shultz, the Secretary of State. And what he did prior to the meeting in Geneva in 1985 was he met with Soviet leadership and he used the skills that he had as an American businessman and negotiated. And there's a meeting that he had with Shevardnadze at the United States mission to the UN just before the meeting in Geneva in 1985, in which they laid out a method of dealing with the differences, just like good businessmen negotiating an agreement that would work for both parties. They first began and said, what do we agree on? Let's build from things that we agree on. We agree that we want to protect our people. We agree that if there is a nuclear war, everything will be lost. Let's agree on that. And they built from there. Then they had a category of issues that they believed that if we negotiated further, we could make progress. So we'll have to deal with those. And then there were issues that they agreed that we're not ready to even deal with. So when Gorbachev and Reagan met in 1985 in Geneva, and I was privileged to be invited to be a participant in the 20th anniversary of that meeting that was hosted by the city of Geneva. So I spent a week with the participants in that meeting. They agreed in the second paragraph of their communique, a nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought. It was obvious. It is absolutely obvious. And I think that Rory's point about how many do we need? We now know that less than 200 of these thousands of weapons were to go off, it would basically throw at least 5 million tons of soot into the stratosphere and end civilization. And we know how close we've come to mistakes. I mean, look what happened here in Honolulu, just a few years ago. Somebody made a mistake and everybody thought that North Korea was attacking you. Or what about, so people realize mistakes can be made, and there have been dozens of mistakes by computers, and people have intervened. So the first thing they said was a nuclear war can't be won and must never be fought. And then the last line in that communique was, and neither party shall seek military advantage over the other. In other words, we persuaded the Soviet culture that we were not out to get them. And they started discussing amongst themselves, why are we making all these sacrifices? Why are we bankrupting ourselves with all of these weapons? How can we change? And once they started to question, the whole oppressive state made no sense. And thus the Cold War ended. So progress can be made. And what happened once that principle was laid in, after Reykjavik, there was a commitment that we would move toward a nuclear weapons-free world. And then the first treaty we had was the INF Treaty that completely wiped out an entire class of offensive weapons. And the Soviets honored it. And thus they stopped targeting Western Europe. And we honored it. Of course, the Trump administration pulled out of that treaty. I don't see any reason to have pulled out of it. We didn't get anything for pulling out of it. And the Russians retargeted Western Europe. But what was put in motion was cooperative threat reduction endeavors, in which we actually bought the material from decommissioned Russian nuclear weapons and use them in our nuclear energy plants. So we converted that which was a threat to us to light bulbs. And we went from over 65,000 to now less than 14,000. That is an accomplishment. That means that we are able to do this. We're able to wipe out huge amounts of these arsenals. But it was all built on trust, and it was all built on honesty, and it was all built on, as Einstein said, bullets kill men, but atomic bombs kill cities. A tank is a defense against a bullet, but there is no defense against a weapon that can destroy civilization. Our defense is law and order. As an American and as a lawyer, I am reminded of a key part of our Constitution. It's called the Supremacy Clause. It's unique. It says this principle in the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and it is. Any ratified treaty is the supreme law of the land. So when we violate treaties, we're not only violating international law, but we're violating the core of our country, which is the Constitution itself, the principle that when we make an agreement, we stick to it. And that's what we have to get back into action in our country. We have to hold every politician to the principles that build our country, that make our country great. There's a foundation, which is the rule of law. And treaties matter. And that's what allowed us to accomplish this great accomplishment of reducing the nuclear arsenals by over 80% and reducing the risk that we have. But today, trust has been broken and has to be rebuilt. And the rule of law is in danger as well. And it's up to us as Americans to get back on track.
So thank you so much, Jonathan. So on following up on Jonathan's comments, Rorry, it seems that credibility is the underlying foundation. So trust is the realm of the coin of the realm. And so, however, it seems that there's a rising mistrust in the global system. Is this so? And if so, what do you think is the cause of it?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely rising mistrust in the international system. It's actually amazing to think about at a time when the process of economic globalization has brought prosperity to so many, that we tend to see that prosperity as potentially advancing threats to our interests instead of significant mutual interests with other countries. But the rising mistrust in the international system really comes from the major powers in that system. I would say particularly the United States and China, but many of the P5 players, including Russia, no longer committing to peaceful use of power, but really trying to use power coercively in order to advance their country's own interest over a larger collective interest of the international community, including towards peace and stability. So, the United States is not a passive player in this. The way that we have projected our military power overseas, particularly I think in the Middle East, but also increasingly in the Asia Pacific, has really caused other countries to fear us and to build defensive counter moves of their own. I want to reflect for just a second on what Jonathan said and what was said in the video about the value of dialogue and diplomacy in these moments. The sorting of issues into, baskets or buckets that, ones that are, very difficult to address and should be put off till later, ones that we can discuss but we may not come to agreement on, and ones where we really have shared mutual interests. I've seen that between the United States and China, that approach has really worked well, and it's been able to deal with some of the rising mistrust in the international system. So, for example, during the strategic and economic dialogue, which was the process of diplomacy put into place in the George W. Bush and Obama administrations to talk to China comprehensively about a range of national interests, sometimes up to over 100 dialogues on different issues. One that was very successful dealt with the idea that nuclear fissile material must be reduced. And so the United States and China together built centers of excellence to convert highly enriched uranium power plants into low enriched uranium power plants, and did that first in China, but then took it internationally and converted several plants in Africa from producing material that could be used to make a weapon into producing material that could not. So we can see that the value of dialogue and diplomacy to deal with some of the rising mistrust in the international system can in fact do a lot to reduce the threat of nuclear weapons. However, to the extent that countries act erratically or continue to use their power coercively in order to advance their interests, they invite backlash. There's always a balancing effect against this. And where we see countries wanting to proliferate now, where we see conversations about developing nuclear weapons is surprisingly not among America's adversaries. Those that have nuclear weapons, they have them, they might be proliferating. But the conversation about building new indigenous nuclear weapons programs is happening with our allies in Asia because they no longer trust that the United States will come to their defense if they're threatened by China or North Korea. And so I think that the work of addressing rising mistrust in the international system starts with consistency of behavior. It starts with the principles that Jonathan just laid out, that when we make agreements and we commit to things, we honor them and we stick with them. And to the extent that we feel that our commitments should change, we start a process of dialogue to address why we think we need those changes instead of just taking action. And so the idea that the United States, would no longer protect its allies with a nuclear umbrella has really kick-started a new era of rising mistrust in East Asia. And I think it's an area that we should all watch very closely. There's obviously active conflict in the Middle East. There's active conflict in Europe. There are so many places that deserve our attention. But at a minimum, we should be able to treat our treaty allies, people we have committed to defending, with a certain level of respect for their security situation and to reinforce the idea that we would indeed come to their protection. That allows them to go on with their lives and go on with their priorities without feeling a need to build more nuclear weapons. The more states that have nuclear weapons, the higher the likelihood is that one weapon will be used, and one weapon is too many. But let's start with our allies first, and then we can move on to building trust among our adversaries or countries that don't look anything like us. And again, we have a track record that shows us that dialogue and diplomacy does work to address these issues.
So thank you so much, Rorry. Today we see several attempts among leaders dealing with the nuclear weapon states being unable to have successful outcomes at peace tables, and except recently between Pakistan and India that successfully ended what appeared to be a growing conflict between these two nuclear weapon states. So Jonathan, how important is it, this aspect of trust that we have been talking about, and I think it's very important to raise again and again in diplomatic relations among leaders of these countries as instructive to us with respect to success or failure of their peace summits. And for example, peace has not been able to be achieved in the prolonged Ukraine-Russia conflict or between Israel and Hamas. So what are your comments about this?
Well, let's take Israel and Hamas first. There was a memo written in the 1990s called A Clean Break. It was written mainly by Douglas Feith and Richard Pearl. Richard Pearl was one of the people that stood in the way of moving toward nuclear disarmament at Reykjavik. And he wrote an essay called A Clean Break. And what was it a clean break from? It was a roadmap to break away from the Oslo Accords that had been achieved to ensure a two-state solution with the security of Israel and a legitimate state for the Palestinian people. So the policy of depriving the Palestinian people from security and dignity and a state of their own, which was part of the promise in the creation of Israel, And the Oslo Accords, which Israel fully supported, and most of the people in Israel supported that until the catastrophe we're living with today. There is no other choice. There's no other choice but moving toward the dignity of all people and the rule of law. The choices we have today in every one of our local conflicts are of a global nature, and they all rest on living up to bargains that have been made. The Oslo Accords were negotiated, and then there was a strategy to break them. And that's what we're seeing today. Same thing with the Ukraine. The Ukrainian nation had nuclear weapons, and they gave them up. They gave them up based on a promise by the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia to recognize their borders and their sovereignty. Russia violated that blatantly. But why did they do that? Russia, you have to listen to what they said. They said, we did that because we don't trust the United States anymore. We think you're going to put offensive weapons right on our border. That's what they believed. They believed that because of our invasion of Iraq. They believed that because of our expansion of NATO into other countries close to them. And they believed it because they stopped trusting us. And they acted out of fear. And they violated the most basic principle of the international order, to respect the borders and sovereignty of other nations. But worse than that, they put into play the idea that if we come to the defense of Ukraine fully, if we come to the defense of Ukraine, that they will then use nuclear weapons. So they've upped the ante of nuclear weapons and put the whole world at risk over this local problem. So when we talk about proliferation, we're talking about seeing a world in which every local border conflict becomes an existential threat to all of humanity if we have a cascade of proliferation. That's why the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is so important. And when we put at risk our promises to our own allies, Denmark, Canada, NATO allies, Canada, for goodness sake, Canada, where we share NORAD with them, you know, really? Or Denmark, where we have our security monitoring processes in Greenland, which is Denmark. We're stimulating proliferation, turning the crisis we see in Ukraine into a model that we'll see in other places. Hopefully people will look over, will look at the abyss, the danger of continuing this breakdown of the international order and start talking. Because if Humpty Dumpty falls apart, we can't put it back together again. We still have a United Nations where people talk. Last week I was participating in a conference of the Interparliamentary Union, which is a union of all the parliaments of the world except ours. And there were the speakers of all the parliaments, the people who put out the agenda of their parliaments, of all the countries in the world, including the Israelis and the Palestinians were there, including the Russians, including all of our NATO allies. Most of the delegations had about 5 or 6 people. The Chinese brought over 104 participants. So in the vacuum of American leadership, other countries will fill that vacuum. I don't really care about that. What I care about is the values that we stand for. Human rights, fundamental freedoms, freedom of conscience, freedom of assembly, freedom to worship as you want to, protection of private property, the rule of law. The state can't just come in and take your house. Truth in reporting the government to the people. The basic formula where the people are the employers and the state is the employee, not the state as the employer and all the rest of us are working for the state, and usually some leader of the state takes the attitude that everybody works for them. Those are the values that matter. I'm not afraid of the Chinese, Chinese in the marketplace per se, but it's a values issue. It's a values issue. And our values matter because they're based on the inherent dignity of every single person and the rights of every single person. And that's what's at risk.
So thank you so much, Jonathan. Yes, values do matter. And, Jonathan says that a lot of it depends on the bargains that we made, the contracts that we enter into, the international treaties, which are the laws of the land. And, it is problematic when we breach our word, our agreements, whether written or oral. So Jonathan also mentioned the NPT, or Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. And Rorry, how can we bring countries back to their NPT commitments?
I think the major countries of the world have to start through leadership and recommitment to the principles of the NPT. They're really, if you read the treaty, there's really three things that countries have committed to do. One is reduce their own nuclear weapons stockpile to contribute to the reduction of nuclear weapons stockpiles in the world. The second is that countries that are not nuclear powers have committed to not becoming them, so no new nuclear powers. And the third is that all countries have the access and ability to develop the peaceful use of nuclear energy, which includes, power generation. There are also several ways that we can use nuclear technology to do important work in global public health, including cancer treatments, et cetera. So those are the three commitments. And it strikes me that we actually don't need the United States to negotiate on any of these things with other countries in order to stand by our commitments. We don't actually need a parity agreement with Russia or a simultaneous drawdown to begin the process of reducing our own nuclear arsenal. Again, how many weapons are enough? Even a simple step to start reducing our nuclear arsenal may prompt a little bit of trust building in the international community about commitment to these principles, and I think that that's important. We need to seriously allow for the peaceful use of nuclear energy and nuclear technology. I mean, despite its many drawbacks and serious, risks, it remains the cleanest source of power in terms of emissions, and less variable than the current scope that we have of renewables, wind, water, thermal, et cetera. So it's actually a really important component of the energy mix that we need at this moment to solve our other existential crisis, which is the coming climate crisis. But in order to allow for the peaceful use of nuclear energy, we have to be able to talk to other countries about the fears that we have that they'll develop nuclear weapons, and to listen to what they say are their fears about the need for nuclear weapons. So we have to approach these countries with what I think of as strategic empathy. Strategic empathy does not mean that we have to agree on the same set of grievances or solutions. We don't even have to agree on the same facts. We simply have to be willing to sit at the table and say, I will listen to your point of view and I will take it seriously. And if we can do that, I believe that there are many accomplished diplomats in the world that want to work on addressing those fears through non-threatening ways. That is indeed what being a statesman is all about. It's about using the values of dialogue and diplomacy and the art of persuasion in order to compel other countries to meet us in the middle and cooperate on shared interests. So if we all agree that there's a shared interest that a nuclear war must never be fought, then there are certainly ways to approach countries, listen to what it is that they are afraid of, and work to reduce those fears. The United States is the most powerful country in the world, by a lot. Our military is the strongest in the world. We can all be very proud of that. We can also recognize that to other countries, it feels quite threatening to deal with the United States. And so to the extent that we approach these conversations with dignity and respect for the interest of others, that we come to listen and not to lecture, we can make a very impactful difference in this world and ultimately lead to a world without nuclear weapons.
Thank you so much, Rorry. I'm going to add 5 more minutes to this portion of the conversation because it's been very, very important for us to hear these points raised by Rorry and Jonathan. So, Jonathan, can you give us your assessment of the legal status worldwide of nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, so we can gauge how near or far we are from achieving a nuclear weapons-free world? Because Gorbachev said that the refusal to engage in dialogue was the biggest mistake of the past few years. And he says above all else, national and all other interests, there are common interests, and the prevention of nuclear war, and that we must move together towards a nuclear weapons-free world. So, Jonathan, give us that assessment. Very quickly, Jonathan, you only have 5 minutes to give the whole...
I'm trying to think about how I can make it as pithy and clear as possible. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty remains a pillar of international security. I would say it's the third most important legal instrument of the 20th century. The first international legal instrument is the UN Charter. It's a place where people can talk to each other. So when we deride the UN Charter, when we marginalize it, we marginalize the very structure that we need. Airplanes can fly from one country to another because of the UN Charter. Business, trade, the UN Convention on Arbitration is what allows financial flow all around the globe. You look at the clothes you're wearing, it may have been financed by a Swiss bank, produced in Malaysia with cotton from God knows where. We live in an integrated world. The climate is integrated, the economy is integrated, but our security attitude toward each other is totally provincial. It's not based on the reality that we have to cooperate to protect the climate. We have to viruses don't carry passports. The polar ice cap doesn't care what happens if we change the Gulf Stream and what happens to all of us. So we have interests that are collective, that are universal, that require cooperation. The UN Charter is the most important instrument to provide that architecture. The second is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says every single human being has inherent dignity worth protecting. This is an extraordinary accomplishment. And the third is stopping these weapons of mass destruction from spreading all over. The Cuban Missile Crisis, what precipitated this important treaty. The KGB and the CIA said, absent constraints, there'll be dozens of nuclear weapon states. So we risk a lot by not adhering to that treaty. And the disarmament provision in the treaty was affirmed by the International Court of Justice that said unanimously there is a duty to negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons. We don't see this duty put before us in the press. We don't talk about it. The City Council of New York passed a resolution to create a commission for education of the populace on nuclear weapons and in our schools. We need to teach people about this threat. It needs to be part of it was part of the dialogue that allowed Reagan to make that progress in the 1980s. People need to talk about it. So imagine if the Biological Weapons Convention said, no country can use polio or smallpox as a weapon. No country. But we'll let 9 countries use the plague as a weapon to maintain international peace and security. You would say, that's absurd. That's not sustainable. That can't work. It just offends our sense of fairness and logic. But that's precisely the regime we have with nuclear weapons. We're saying that 9 countries can have them, and we're not going to call on them to negotiate and make a safer world, and the rest of the world can't have them. That's not going to last very long. People don't like to be treated as second-class citizens. People don't like to feel that they can't rely on the most powerful to restrain themselves. So our choice is either a dystopian world in which every conflict puts the whole world at risk, or getting back on track to the values that make our country great, the rule of law, and what makes our business community great? because I've done business in lots of countries around the world as an international lawyer. Lots of places you make an agreement, it's not very stable. It's transactional, and it's always in negotiations. In this country, for the most part, when two people shake hands and say, we're in agreement, you can trust them. That's the norm. And that's the kind of leadership we need, leadership that just basically, it's not partisan, it's just integrity. And that's for all of us to live up to and to force our political leaders to do the same.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate hearing values articulated and principles for living, not only in our personal relationships, but see how important it is as it plays out on the international diplomatic scene. So always we have responsibility to work on our own moral, ethical compass. So thank you so much, Rorry and Jonathan. Now we're going to open up the floor to questions and answers from the audience. Please, you'll notice a microphone on either side of the aisles for our audience here. And also we have a question and answer going on our technologies of Zoom as a webinar platform. So please line up if you have questions that you would like to ask. Please take the microphone on either side. Please state your name and your affiliation, and please feel free to ask your questions. Okay, go ahead. Joseph, please take the microphone. This is Joseph Madamba. I should say Dr. Joseph Madamba. He is, go ahead, Joseph, the microphone, please. He is MD, internist, alternative integrative medical doctor. So go ahead, Joseph, ask your question, please, and direct your question to either Rorry or Jonathan or both of them as may be appropriate.
Yes, thank you. This question is for Ms. Daniels. China's military and nuclear buildup has been concerning. Has China issued any explicit nuclear threats over the situation in Taiwan?
Well, thank you very much for the question. My expertise, though, in part nuclear nonproliferation is cross-Taiwan Strait relations, so I'm very grateful for this question. No, China has not issued any sort of nuclear threat over Taiwan. We do know that a Taiwan conflict could escalate very, very quickly, though, because the United States does have provisions in our law, our legislation, the Taiwan Relations Act, to provide Taiwan with arms of a defensive nature and to ensure the issue of Taiwan's sovereignty is resolved without the use of force or coercion. At this point, I believe the way forward on Taiwan is to continue to uphold a diplomatic solution. Actually, I think U.S. policy on Taiwan is very consistent and clear and could be applied to a lot of border disputes, maritime territorial disputes, as well as sovereignty issues around the world, which is to say, we take no position on the eventual status of Taiwan's sovereignty. We simply want the issue to be resolved without the use of force or coercion. So I think the Chinese have been quite clear, actually, that their nuclear buildup they see as defensive in nature. And as providing them with as they build their nuclear weapons arsenal, providing them with sufficient arsenal for a second strike capability. The Chinese have actually committed to no first use of nuclear weapons, something that the United States government has not done. So while the issue of Taiwan is very serious and it's important that it's resolved without force or coercion, the nuclear dimension has not yet been a piece of that puzzle for the Chinese.
Okay, thank you so much, Rorry. I see someone standing up, Diana Hirabayashi, taking the mic. So, Diana, please ask your question.
Thank you.
And to whom will your question be directed?
To both, thank you.
Okay.
A few years ago, those of us who live here in Hawaii received a false missile alert, as Jonathan mentioned, through the state's alert system. False or not, it was very concerning and alarming. Realistically, what can or should we do in the event of an imminent attack?
So, Jonathan, I'll have you answer that, please.
The International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War won the Nobel Peace Prize. It's an organization of of doctors with expertise in the subject, as well as the Pugwash conferences, which is scientists. And one of the hats that I wear is I'm the senior advisor to and the representative to the United Nations of the Summit of the Nobel Peace Prize winners. And to a one, they all agree, you can't do anything. And so a few years ago, when there was the ballistic missile threat here in Hawaii, the alerts, the U.S. Pacific Command, this is what was put on the televisions here, right? Social media said, ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill, right? And then the U.S. Pacific Command was all over the television, said, the U.S. Pacific Command has detected a missile threat to Hawaii. A missile may impact on land or sea within minutes. Within minutes, this is not a drill. If you're indoors, stay indoors. If you're outdoors, seek immediate shelter in a building. Remain indoors, well away from windows. If you are driving, pull safely to the side of the road and seek shelter in a building or lay on the floor. We will announce when the threat has ended. This is not a drill. Take immediate action measures. Well, let me explain that then less than 1,000th of a second, the heat of a nuclear bomb will be 3 times the heat on the face of the sun. Within 100 miles, there'll be winds of 600 miles per hour. A fireball will be created that will basically evaporate everything in that range. Closer to the epicenter, the bomb in Hiroshima was about, the highest estimate is 15 kilotons, 15,000 tons of TNT. We have bombs in the megaton range, 1 million tons of TNT. We're talking about immeasurable suffering, immeasurable destruction. There is no defense. There is no place that you could hide in. And you know what? I was in Hiroshima for a gathering, and there was I met a man who runs a Buddhist temple now, and he was 8 years old when it happened, and he and some of his friends had gone into a tunnel in the morning of August 6, 1945, to play, you know, like kids do when they're 8, 9 years old, and they came out in the afternoon. Everything they knew, everyone they knew, was gone. Gone. And he was just eaten by anger and resentment for many years. And he said when he was about 16, it hit him. He could just have this anger eat up the rest of his life, or cultivate compassion and forgiveness. And he decided to do that. And he's become a very noble person. And he set up a Buddhist temple to focus on the power of compassion and forgiveness. We all ought to ask for forgiveness. You know, to build these arsenals with our taxes, to threaten people all over the world. I don't believe that this venture with nuclear weapons is morally acceptable. The idea of putting future generations at risk like this. That's why the term abolition was used by Mikhail Gorbachev, the same term that we did with slavery. Slavery was immoral. It couldn't be made moral by improving the condition of slaves, by improving their diet, improving their education. The enterprise was immoral, and nuclear weapons were immoral. And Ronald Reagan understood that clearly. That's why he was willing to make the change that he made and helped end the Cold War. Maybe his politics were very right-wing and conservative, but at heart he was a reasonable human being who had an optimistic attitude. The only possible protection we have against nuclear weapons is getting rid of them.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Okay, we have more time for question and answer. So yes, Tadia Rice, you have the floor now.
Nui loa. Oh, we're on. Mahalo nui loa. This distinguished panel that has come together is like having the brainiacs of the world in front of us. Thank you so much for your information. We are living in a time, in a world, where isolationists are working against globalists and where hate is rampant and really competing against loving activities by individuals and organizations. Our time now is that of, in the United States, the erosion of a constitution, the loss of law, the loss of trust amongst our own citizenry. Oligarchy seems to be winning. Money is evaporating into others' pockets. We are facing not just nuclear proliferation, which of course will just wipe us all out, but other things on the way to isolationism and all of the factors that we've talked about. What can I, as one individual who might have a limited influence and has relationships that I'm trying to build that are positive and growth-oriented, what can I really do to talk to a politician who is not interested, or to try and galvanize a religious organization that has now swallowed the Kool-Aid of a new administration? What do I do as an individual when I'm trying to inculcate in my children and grandchildren values and morals where they cannot see it reflected by our institutions?
To whom is that question directed, Tadia? I'm sorry. To whom was your question directed?
Ikalamai, I didn't hear what you said.
Okay. To whom is your question directed?
To all of you, or any one of you who would feel like you could answer that question.
Okay, great. I'll direct your question to Rorry.
Okay. Well, it's a big question. I'm very appreciative of it. I think that, to start with, you're doing all of the right things already. You've already mentioned them. You're reaching out to people in your community. You're trying to instill values and morals in the people who you love and who love you most. That is always where we have the biggest influence. I invite you all to consider that the type of problem that we're facing here, which again is really at the heart of it, fear of each other, is not a problem set that's just about politicians in the international world. It's really about all of us and who we are, and how we relate to each other. So I think you're on the right path, and I guess what you can do, very specifically, is don't give up. Don't stray from the path because it feels hard. All of the problems that we are talking about today, we're talking about nuclear weapons and proliferation, but there are many ways that fear impacts our lives. And there's simply no end to this work, right? If it wasn't nuclear weapons, it might be something else that we are afraid of or that we're threatened by. And so I think that the challenge that we have in all of us, and when we're talking to politicians, is not to give up in the face of the magnitude of the challenge. And so to the extent that you can continue to raise the issue, be dogged, be aggressive, and assertive without being, rude, I think that over time, the groups that are coming together, the communities of support for the type of world that we want to create, will indeed over time have impact and value.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, Jonathan, you wanted to say something, and then we'll go right into our conclusory comments.
I don't know you, so it would be presumptuous of me to tell you what to do. But there are general principles here, and I'll just take two of them. Well, first of all, we heard from some political leaders here. Your senator and your governor, you don't need to lobby them. I think they need to be wind in their sails. And how you influence political characters is you organize. You don't mourn. You organize, and you come with groups of people with your policy suggestions and engage with them. So I think it's real important that when you have political leadership like this, to push them to take the next step, to tell them that, to let them know that your group is going to be behind them, and the next thing is educate people. The ideas that you've expressed, your concerns, spread them, find ways of spreading them. And I want to just stop right now and thank Audrey Kitagawa for convening us today. Because it's exactly this kind of process that has to take place all across our country and across the world, where people get together and feel safe to speak frankly, to feel safe that we can talk with each other. You know, that's, Rorry keeps coming back to fear versus a sense of confidence and safety. Are we the land of the free, the home of the brave, or not? Really, the song ends with a question. Oh, say, will this flag be standing? Will we prevail in this turbulent time and be brave and free? So I think deeply about this question, and I think deeply about how the circumstances of the moment affect me personally. And I've come to this conclusion. My spiritual state, my state of being, should not be contingent on political vicissitudes of the world. Because what makes me human, the values that come from within, don't come from the information of the world. Love comes from the light of the soul. Forgiveness never comes from what happens to you in the world. The world gives you lots of reasons to be pissed off. But forgiveness comes from something deep inside. Compassion that you'll feel the suffering of others, does that come from the world? No, that comes from something deep in the heart, deep in the soul. So these things that are so important to us, they are not contingent on the political circumstances. They're contingent on something deep within us. So we've got to, all of us, dig deep and say, do I really believe in the love of power or the power of love? Jesus' message, the power of love. Do I really believe in the power of ideas? We hold these truths to be self-evident. That was an ought, not an is, when it was stated. It was a vision, and it's the vision of our country. It's the vision. When it was stated, it didn't include white men without property. It didn't include women at all. It didn't include people of color or indigenous people. But the seed was there. The seed of truth was there. So it's those perennial truths of the centrality of compassion the Buddha taught, the centrality of love that Jesus taught. These truths are what I think we have to cling to and organize ourselves around. And that's not new. That's always been there. We're not the first group of people to face turbulent times. It's our job, however, to reaffirm those highest values that have always been part of humanity.
So thank you, Jonathan. We shall consider that to be your conclusory remarks.
Well, I can give it you. My conclusory remark is what Albert Einstein and Bertrand Russell and Robert Oppenheimer, the three of them created the World Academy of Art and Science. They wrote a manifesto, and they said what's before you is death or flourishing, and it depends on this. Remember your humanity and forget the rest.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. Okay, so now, Rorry, your conclusory remarks. Please, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll be very brief. It's hard to follow Jonathan, so it's good to be brief. But I think I would say to all of you, again, to kind of follow on the excellent question and conversation we've had, I really encourage you, just don't buy the premise that we can be sorted into good countries and bad countries, good and evil, good guys and bad guys. I'll leave you with a quote by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who is a very famous Russian dissident. And he said, and this has been so impactful in my life, if only it were so simple If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it was necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line between good and evil cuts through the very heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of our own heart? I find that quote very powerful because it reminds us that, one, the work that we do starts within us. Two, that we cannot simply typify and create enemies where perhaps none exist by buying into this premise that there are good countries and evil countries in the world. And if we do that, if we really look at all the countries in the world and say, you don't need to be like us to be legitimate, you don't need to, have a government system like us, you don't need to have the same interests, you don't even need to have the same values, we can see that there are good and evil inside all of us, then we attack this idea that we're all the hero in our own story and everything that is happening to us that is bad is coming from without us and not a part of what is inside us. And that allows us to have compassion for other countries. It allows us to have strategic empathy. Again, there's no world in which all the countries are going to agree on a mutual path forward, but as long as we can resolve our differences through dialogue and not through the use of threat or coercion, I think we can indeed build the peaceful world that we all deserve.
Well, I really thank both of our speakers for their very informative, educational, and also very heartfelt messages to all of us. And, recently there was a publication from Toda Institute for Peace and Global Policy Research. And Ramesh Thakur, in his report called A Skeptic's Take on the Nuclear Bomb, said, a more rational and prudent approach to reducing nuclear risks would be to actively advocate and pursue the minimization, reduction, and elimination agendas for the short, medium, and long terms identified in the report of the International Commission on Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. The claim that nuclear weapons could not proliferate if they did not exist is both an empirical and a logical truth. The very fact of their existence in the arsenals of 9 countries is sufficient guarantee of their proliferation to others and someday again use. Conversely, the nuclear disarmament is a necessary condition of nuclear non-proliferation. So in the real world, therefore, the only choice is between nuclear abolition or cascading proliferation and guaranteed use, whether by design or accident. And I think we have covered the range in today's conversation about the possibilities that exist so long as nuclear weapons exist. And I love the conversation about the return to our values, which were articulated by both of our speakers, because it is an important conversation that we must continue to have, and that is about our capacity to have self-reflection, inner awareness, and to be able to understand that in reality we are deeply spiritual beings in human form and structure. So it is very important that we return to our authentic selves, and that is capital A, capital S, and who we are as spiritual beings, and that is the essence of love. And in the totality of that love is our capacity to grow the heart of compassion, understanding, and empathy, and caring for each other. And that is who we are in reality as spiritual beings. And we must never underestimate the power that each of us holds to be able to start the inner journey of self-reflection, that we may come to realize the reality of who we really are. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking your time from your very busy day to have this conversation with us, listen to this conversation, participate in this conversation, and by your very presence have expressed your interest and caring for all of us and each of us and for all of humanity. So thank you so very much, everyone. Yes, we truly have. Hold on just a second. I'm going to turn over the floor to Ed Young, our MC, and I just wanted to, express my gratitude to all of you and to our speakers. So, Ed, you now have the floor.
Thank you to our moderator, Audrey Kitagawa, to our speakers, Rorry Daniels and Jonathan Granoff, and to Senator Mazie Hirono. Can we give them a round? Rorry Daniels and Jonathan Granoff flew in specially from New York City to be with us in person. And we express our appreciation to them to take time from their busy schedules to share with us in person. This has been an insightful and substantial, rich program that has helped to give us a deeper awareness of the importance of working together to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and ultimately to have them abolished that we may all live in a world free of nuclear weapons. We have 2 more programs that are commemorating this 80th anniversary. Please join us tomorrow, August the 9th, at the city's Mission Memorial Auditorium at 9:30 a.m., and on Sunday, August the 10th, at the Jodo Mission of Hawaii at 10 a.m. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you there. If you would like more information about the balance of the programs, please go to www.multiculturalcooperation.net events page. All of the registration materials are located there. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and I bid you all aloha nui loa.
Aloha. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.